All right. The moment you've all been waiting for. The number one Super Bowl champion is, drum roll please. The 1987 Washington Redskins. Now, the 1987 NFL season was a season unlike any other. The NFL players and the players union in the NFL were at a standstill on a new collective bargaining agreement. They wanted better wages, also more flexibility in free agency, as well as better pensions. And the owners wouldn't budge. So after week 3 of the NFL season, the NFL players went on strike. So teams from all across the NFL, they ended up getting replacement players, guys who had either played only college ball, never got into the NFL, or some players who played in the NFL previously but were cut, or some played in the CFL. They were just getting guys from all over. And the Redskins were no exception. They had replacement players such as Tony Robinson at quarterback, Anthony Allen at wide receiver, also Allen Harvin at running back, as well as Ricky Johnson, Craig McEwen at tight end. So these players those players, as well as many others, were on the 87 Redskins practice squad. They ended up getting some very key wins. During that time, they ended up going to New York, stunning the Giants, who were the defending Super Bowl champs at the time. Matter of fact, not just stunning them, they dominated them 38-12. Also, they won against the Cowboys in Dallas on Monday Night Football 13-7. And they got a very close win against the New York Jets. They came from behind to win 17-16. And then after that, the regular Redskins, as well as all the players in the NFL, crossed the line as the strike was affecting their pockets. So they all came back to their jobs, and the replacement players were shown the door once again. The only replacement player that ended up staying for the remainder of the season was Anthony Allen. But once the Redskins regular players returned, they had their struggles, but they went on to win 5 out of 8 games to finish the regular season at 11-4 with the NFC East crown, as well as the number 1 seed. No, excuse me. They ended up finishing with the 3rd seed in the NFC. Now, the Redskins, they were definitely dominant on both sides of the ball. What's going on here? Okay, there we go. My apologies. As Doug Williams definitely did a great job as he had to replace Mark Rippon, who ended up having a season-ending injury. And the Redskins definitely didn't miss a beat with him under center. They were top 10 in every offensive category. They finished third in total offense, averaging 373 yards per game. They finished fourth in passing, averaging 233 passing yards per game. They finished seventh in rushing, averaging 140 rushing yards per game. They were fourth in passing touchdowns. They finished with 27 passing touchdowns, which averaged out to 1.8 passing touchdowns per game. They finished third in rushing touchdowns, finished with 18 rushing TDs, averaging 1.2 rushing touchdowns per game. And they also finished fifth in points, averaging 25 points per game. Now, along with Doug Williams, he also had wide receiver, the All-Pro, Gary Clark. But the Redskins had a pretty great defense as well that gets underrated by a lot of people. They had the Hall of Famer Darryl Green, as well as Charles Mann, the All-Pro, as well as Dexter Manley, and the other cornerback, Barry Wilborn. And they finished top 10 in almost every defensive category. They were 18th in defense. They gave up 334 yards per game. They were 24th in pass defense, giving up 222 passing yards per game. They were 10th in rush defense, giving up 111 rushing yards per game. They were 6th in points allowed, only giving up 19 points per game. They finished 4th in sacks, which they ended up with 53 sacks. That averaged out to 3.5 sacks per game. And they were only 16th in takeaways, which they only created 34 takeaways. All right, so the Redskins had a tough road ahead in the playoffs as they were the third seed. If they wanted to get back to the Super Bowl and win it, in the wild card, they had a bye because back then there was only 5 teams instead of 7 like there is today. But in the divisional round, they went on the road in Chicago against the Bears. They won a very close game, 21-7. Then they ended up hosting a home game in the NFC Championship game against the Minnesota Vikings, who were definitely having a hot playoff run as well. And they had to also fight tooth and nail with them in a real close game as the Redskins held off the Vikings 17-10 to advance to their 4th Super Bowl in 5 years. No, excuse me. Their 4th Super Bowl in 6 years. And they were having a remarkable season as well as a remarkable playoff run as they won with Doug Williams as the backup QB and also the replacement players. And they were going up against the Denver Broncos in Super Bowl XXII. As Elway and the Broncos had a pretty dominant playoff run, and they were trying to finally break through and win the Super Bowl after losing it the previous year to the Giants. But The Redskins and Doug Williams, they came out firing on all cylinders after Denver had taken a 10-0 lead in the first quarter. It was all Redskins from there. Matter of fact, in the second quarter, they scored 35 points. That is still the most in a quarter in Super Bowl history. Let me make sure I'm right. Yep. That is the most points scored in the first half in Super Bowl history, as well as the most points scored in any quarter in the Super Bowl. Man, Doug Williams was just a beast, firing that ball all the way down the field, finding various open receivers. And then in the fourth quarter, the Redskins put the icing on the cake with another touchdown as they dominated the Broncos in Super Bowl XXII, 42-10, to win their second Super Bowl in franchise history. That was, if I said third Super Bowl title, that's my mistake. It was only their second Super Bowl title in franchise history, which they had won 5 years prior. And they won it in dominant fashion thanks to Doug Williams. Doug Williams was named Super Bowl MVP. He finished with 340 yards, 4 touchdowns, an interception with a 127 QBR rating. But Jimmy Smith also stole the show with 22 carries, 204 rushing yards, and 2 touchdowns. Also, Ricky Sanders balled out with 9 receptions on 11 targets for 193 yards and 2 touchdowns. And he caught an 80-yard pass from Doug Williams. So the Redskins definitely dominated the Super Bowl from start to finish and walked away Super Bowl champions. Now with the replacement players, of course, like I said, they ended up being cut. But the replacement players didn't get Super Bowl rings because, the ownership and the front office felt that it would have been too expensive to give out all those rings to the replacement players. And they also did a 30 for 30 on the Redskins replacement players back in 2018 called Year of the Scab, which was a great documentary. You really got it. It really got into the inside of those players, what their experiences were like playing in the NFL and what it felt like after they ended up being cut from the team and how they were slighted out of not getting Super Bowl rings. Now, the crazy part about it was they were allowed to buy tickets to the Super Bowl that they were a part of. Well, for the team that they had played for if the Redskins had advanced. But they couldn't get anybody else tickets. Well, not buy tickets. They could get free tickets just for them and another person. But, they didn't get the chance to have to give away multiple tickets like everyone else. And it definitely hurt a lot of those replacement players for a long time that they were the contributor to a Super Bowl winning team, and they didn't have the rings to show for it. But ultimately in 2018, the Redskins replacement players were finally honored in the ceremony, and they finally got the Super Bowl rings that were long overdue to them. I had to put this Redskins team at number 1 due to the fact that not only they had a record-breaking, made history. Well, they made history a lot of ways in the Super Bowl. I just mentioned the most points being scored in a first half, but also it was historic for Doug Williams, as he was the first black quarterback to lead his team to a Super Bowl. Later on, it'll be quarterbacks like Russell Wilson, Pat Mahomes, and Jalen Hurts, who led their teams to Super Bowl titles. Also, Williams came from an HBCU. He went to Grambling State University. And Doug Williams, he faced a lot of heat heading into that Super Bowl. A reporter asked him, what was it like to be a black quarterback in the Super Bowl? What kind of dumbass question is that? You wouldn't have asked that to John Elway or Joe Montana or Phil Simms or Terry Bradshaw asked them what it's like to be a white quarterback in the Super Bowl. So why would that reporter ask him that? That was a very ignorant question. But also, the Redskins kept winning and finding ways to win. They won with their regular players. They also won with their replacement players. And the replacement players got some very key wins against some NFC East rivals. They went on the road, dominated the Giants, then went on the road to beat the Cowboys in comeback fashion. And it is messed up that those replacement players weren't acknowledged for a while. It seemed like they were forgot in the annals of Redskins / Commanders history. And in that 30 for 30 documentary, one of the replacement players said that even the guy who parked the cars and the girl who answered calls got Super Bowl rings, but they didn't. And even dudes like Doug Williams and Darryl Green even said that the replacement players should have gotten Super Bowl rings because they were on the team and they definitely contributed to the team winning that Super Bowl that season. And you got to give a shout out to Joe Gibbs, the head coach, as well as their GM, the late Bobby Bethard. I hope I said his name right. If I didn't, I apologize. As they put a pretty good team of replacement players together that led the Redskins to some huge wins for those few weeks. Also, this is one of the most interesting Super Bowl winning stories I have ever researched and also heard about. That a team could go on a strike, could follow their fellow players on a strike, and then bring in a bunch of guys off the street, make them a team, and have them win games. And then once the regulars come back, they really don't miss a beat. They end up winning. And led all the way to a Super Bowl title with a backup QB. And that's why I have the 1987 Redskins here at number 1.